everybody's hoping for destabilization inside of the Russian Federation. But yet, I find it very difficult to accept that they're not cooperating and that this was more of a test of power internally to understand which individuals are going to be loyal to the so-called Wagner private group and the Kremlin. Because the Wagner Group continues to recruit for their missions all over the world.
Now, the Wagner Group, the Russian private army that recently led a mutiny on Moscow, may have pulled out of Ukraine. Intelligence from the Pentagon, that's America's spy agency, says the group are no longer operating in Ukraine in any meaningful way. Yevgeny Prigozhin, their leader and Putin's former chef, is believed to still be in Russia. We can speak now to Lada Roslycky in Kyiv. She is the founder of the Black Trident Security and Defence Consultancy and is on the line now. Lada, good afternoon to you.
Hello, good afternoon.
Just tell us what you read into this announcement from the Pentagon, this assessment from the Pentagon about Wagner's participation in Ukraine or lack of it.
Well, it's a curious announcement that also calls for verification. The Wagner Group in itself is an enigma, operating in over 18 countries. We have no confirmation here on the ground that they have actually left formally. They changed their clothes, they changed their insignia. Most important thing to understand that they are directly linked to Kremlin's foreign policy, not only in Ukraine, but all over the world.
And I mean, the status of Wagner in Russia is in some confusion because particularly as Vladimir Putin's comments in a recent newspaper interview seem to disagree with his official spokesman. What do you read into that?
Well, I read into the fact that the Kremlin is doing its best to create even more chaos and a lack of understanding of what is happening. And eventually what we're hoping for is that everyone who loves and practices falsehood is digging one's own grave. It is a grave mistake to think in any way that these organizations, the Russian private military companies, have any authority to act without the support and direction of the Kremlin.
You talk about chaos there. The aborted rebellion by the Wagner Group, by Prigozhin, caused disarray in the Kremlin in the short term, but that now appears to have stabilised. Do you worry that any advantage Ukraine might have gained from that weakness that was exposed in Putin might have now dissipated?
Well, I'm not really sure that it was ever there. We have to remember that Russia is a very powerful country, and the fact that their intelligence services, their military intelligence allowed them to come over 100 kilometers to Moscow is indicative of some sort of cooperation. So we have to be very sober when we're analyzing. Of course, everybody is hoping for destabilization inside of the Russian Federation, but yet I find it very difficult to accept that they're not cooperating and that this was more of a test of power internally to understand which individuals are going to be loyal to the so-called Wagner private group and the Kremlin. Because the Wagner Group continues to recruit for their missions all over the world. So Ukraine didn't really lose anything. What it had to gain is also under question, because we don't know if they're here, if they're not here. And the so-called liberation of Bakhmut, which is one of the bloodiest war territories in Ukraine, was supposed to have been handed over by the Wagner Group to the Russians. And the battles there are very, very brutal, ongoing, 24/7.
And just finally, just a final brief thought. You've seen with this NATO summit in the last few days that there have been tensions over the depth of Western support for Ukraine. How deep are concerns there in Ukraine about how long your allies might stay the course?
I don't think that the concern of how long they will stay the course is the main problem. The main problem is that the allies do not understand deeply enough the function that the Ukrainians are serving in protecting Russian imperialism from entering Western countries and other allies.
Lada Roslycky, thank you very much for joining us from Kyiv.
Thank you.